Parry! Yeah, there's two exclamation points there, so you bet your ass I'm making use of them. Today I took a quick look at Parry, and by quick look I mean very quick look, because I completed this game in less than an hour, played it for slightly over an hour, and then called it quits because there wasn't much else. So, really what it comes down to is if I had any gripes with this game, it's that there's not more. And if you know me and you've been on this channel, you'll know that that's a pretty damn good thing. Not that the game doesn't have some other problems that are extremely minor, and I'll get into them, but at the end of the day, I think Parry is a fun game. As with all of these types of videos, if you want to play the game for yourself, if what you see looks interesting, I'll be linking it in the description so you can check it out. Now, that said, Parry was also an incredibly frustrating game, but frustrating in a good way. See, games without any challenge at all, well, then what's the point? Unfortunately, I'm not a huge person who gets into the whole roguelite, reset your progress when you die kind of things. And I know that probably sounds rich coming from me when I talk about games like Deepwoken, but there's some longevity and stuff that you can do between characters and stuff like that in games like those. But when it comes down to a game that literally sets you all the way back to zero so you can play for 30, 40 minutes and then die, and then you're back to the start and I have to slog through the same 30, 40 minutes I already played, that, to me, not that much fun. And so these types of games have a hard time investing me a lot of the time, but I can look at the thing objectively because I understand that there are people who like those types of games and understand that games like this are quite well done. Parry is absolutely one of those examples of, while it might not necessarily be my cup of tea, it's definitely someone else's, and it's really well made. I think the thing that carries Parry on its back as it stands right now is the variety of enemies that you encounter. As it stands, your gameplay styles themselves are extremely limited, with you only having a singular attack. You can get a, I believe, single ability if you get lucky at the end of 10 rounds, which is where you get an upgrade, just like a lot of these other types of roguelike games. But at the end of the day, no matter what you do, the gameplay is going to come down to melee, parry, counterattack, repeat. And this would be a boring gameplay loop if it weren't for the interesting enemies that accompany this playstyle, and that's where things get interesting. Enemies that literally cannot be caught up to with your melee attacks, so your only choice is to parry their bullets back at them. Or enemies that slow you down if you hit them with projectiles that are less likely to hit you at any given time, but the enemy can redirect the projectiles while they're in flight to come at you, so if you're standing still, it'll be easier to parry it, but you're also more likely to get hit. Tank enemies that have a lot of health, enemies that attack faster than your default enemies, keeping you on your toes, flying drones that can fire hit-scan projectiles, robot dogs that can fire missiles into the air that fall out of the sky, the list goes on. The enemy variety here is definitely the best part of the game, hands down, because it makes every single enemy that you fight a unique experience, and when you start combining the enemies on top of each other, you have to adjust your playstyle accordingly, and adjust your timings accordingly, which is extremely interesting and fun from a gameplay perspective. As you play more and fight against the different types of enemies in different situations, you'll figure out the timings as well as the target acquisition and who you choose to take out first. So for example, while I was playing, I found it really obnoxious to try to deal with projectile firing enemies while also trying to hit the melee enemies. So I'd end up kiting a lot of the melee enemies around while deflecting projectiles back until there weren't any projectile enemies left, and then I'd go in for the melee enemies. But I can see people with higher skill levels being able to deal with both at the same time and increasing their time specifically, or people that maybe thought the melee enemies were harder to deal with and prioritizing them first. It's really about player expression, and that's what makes it interesting. Now, I touched on it being frustrating earlier, and I want to talk about why I think it was frustrating, especially at the beginning, and why it gets less frustrating the more you play and the more you understand, as well as the sort of failing of the tutorial. You see, this game does have a tutorial, and considering that the gameplay loop is extremely simple, I don't even know if it necessarily needed a tutorial, but I'm glad it has one. That said, there is one major, fatal flaw with the tutorial, and one major mechanic that is left out that makes the gameplay experience, it is make or break. And once you realize it, the game gets a hell of a lot better. But before you realize it, oh my god, I wanted to throw myself out a window. And that crucial, vital piece of information is that when you parry an enemy, it heals your health bar. it just doesn't tell you this. I have no idea why this wasn't in the tutorial. It could have been a singular line of text. When you parry an enemy, you will heal your health. It could have been that simple, but it wasn't, and I guess they forgot. I genuinely think my best assumption here is that they forgot to put this in here. And the thing is, once you understand this, it radically changes the way you play the game. Because once you understand that your parrying can heal your health back, you can have instances where there's only a couple enemies left, and if you've lost some health, you can go out of your way to simply wait and parry their attacks instead of trying to attack them outright. When I played this game first, I think the most intuitive way to play a lot of these games is to try to clear the level as fast as possible and kill enemies as fast as possible. But as it turns out, the way the game is designed, it doesn't actually lend itself to this gameplay style at all. Because if you go out of your way to prioritize just killing enemies and not worrying too much about parrying, and parrying when it's necessary but attacking when you can, you'll end up having less health overall if you're taking damage. And it's extremely obvious in my first couple of playthroughs in the game, because I didn't know this, that I died several times when I almost certainly wouldn't have if I understood the mechanics and they were explained better. There are a bunch of stages, especially in the beginner level of the game, the very first one that you play, where it's basically free heal rounds, where it'll just send a bunch of melee enemies at you, or there's this one round where it sends a bunch of these jumping enemies that are free parries, and this level alone can almost certainly heal you from basically no health at all the way up to full health, assuming that you know that parrying will heal you, which if you don't, well, go fuck yourself, I guess. And so this, when compounded on the fact that the final boss in the game currently, as there's only 2 bosses in the game, is very obviously way overtuned for the sake of making a difficult final boss while there isn't very much content, can lead to a lot of frustration. In my case, I played on normal mode and I got up to the final boss of the game after losing a whole bunch of lives and got absolutely obliterated because he does a ton of damage, has these saw blades that are incredibly hard to dodge, and even if you do dodge them, there's a whole bunch of shit on the ground, which if you step on it does a bunch of damage to you as well. And what it comes down to is not having the information becomes a real damn problem. Now, I say that final enemy in the game is overtuned because even once I understood all of the mechanics, even after I went through back on easy mode because I was pissed off and I just wanted to see how far the game went, I managed to clear past the boss without too much trouble, then get into the endless mode and play for a very long period of time. The endless mode is pretty fun. It just puts you into an endless horde mode against an unlimited supply of enemies, and as the rounds go up, you take more damage. Pretty cool stuff. But after I got out of that, I considered myself pretty much nearing the skill ceiling that I thought I was going to make in a decent amount of time, and that proved true when I went back and played on normal mode, and I pretty much obliterated all the stages all the way up until this second boss, and then we almost had a repeat of history. I think they really need to tune back this boss once they add more, because if this is going to be this much of a roadblock and feel this unfair at the second stage of the game, yeah, there's gonna be some problems. And again, if it takes 10 minutes or so to get up here and then you die and you reset all the way back to the beginning, good God, what a waste of time. Overall though, I think what it comes down to is that Parry has a lot of really good legs to stand on. Every interaction feels good, and that's one of those things that's hard to explain and one of the things that you really just need to play the game to understand for yourself. Assuming the people behind this continue working on it, I think that it has a bright future ahead of it. Whether it be adding new weapon types that can do different types of things, adding new modifiers, obviously new enemy types and boss designs. As it stands, the potential here is really high, and I hope they manage to meet it. As it stands right now, it simply sits as a fun hour and a half distraction at best, and you know what, as that, it's serviceable. So like I said, if you want to give this game a go, it's going to be linked in the description. I recommend it. With that said, I am done here. So if you enjoyed the video, you can leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't, don't. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day and night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time.